The Joker is... Okay, hold on. Before I begin this one, I'm gonna have to make a pretty big disclaimer here. I know right out of the gate that a lot of people aren't gonna like this video because I'll be criticizing the Joker. However, this video is not meant to delegitimize anyone else's experience of the movie. We all like different things, and no one's opinion is more or less valid than the other. If you love the Joker, or it's one of your favorite movies of all time, that's awesome, and you're not alone. While the critical perception of Joker was largely negative for some reason, individual viewers and audience members absolutely loved it. This is both an insanely popular and wildly successful film. I mean, it's already the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. And I'm glad for what the movie's done. Not only is Joker many people's favorite movie of all time, it's also sparked discussion about many of the issues that the movie touches on. I'm glad that Joker exists, and I'm even more glad that so many people love it. However, I would like to share my take on it. And again, this is just my take. I'm not claiming to be any more correct than anyone else who's seen the movie. Also, spoilers for the whole movie, by the way. In fact, when I first watched the movie, I really enjoyed it. If nothing else, Joker's a very impactful movie. The movie does a great job with creating contact with the audience, and this is especially true in regards to the violence. Unlike many movies where they just throw in fight scenes to sell tickets and pad out trailers, the violence in Joker actually feels, violent. It's used sparingly and tastefully. When Joker brutally murders those Dead Poet Society guys at the start of the movie, I was like, shit, that's fucking brutal. It's Arthur's complete overreaction to these hecklers that makes it feel so real. He starts out almost acting in self-defense, and then at some point during the incident, he starts reveling in the fear and agony he's causing. So he finally ends up gunning down an unarmed, innocent man out of this combination of sheer joy and anger. Same goes for the climactic scene with Murray. Ironically, putting the death of this scene behind another screen, just beyond what the movie's showing us, makes it feel even more uncomfortable. Talk shows are these places we're supposed to find entertainment in, and Joker perverts what the audience watches by committing such a brutal act on live television. By setting the scene on a talk show, it makes the audience forget they're watching the movie. It takes the traditional movie screen and sets it to the side. Everything feels a little more real. The violence in the Joker reminds me of that one line in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where the Mansons blame Hollywood actors and producers for desensitizing the public to violence through TV and film. And I think in a way, these movies certainly have. But in contrast to many other films, the violence in Joker feels real. But it's not just the violence, it's the entire heavy tone the movie sticks to and doesn't let up from. The movie puts the viewer in uncomfortable situations and never really gives the audience anyone to root for. As the movie continues, Joker's rise to power only makes for a more uneasy and heavy viewing experience. So coming out of the theater, the movie definitely left an impact on me. But as the days went by, the impact lessened, and more problems started arising in the movie. The Joker started to feel like an elaborate stage act, where when you watch it, it does a great job of disguising itself as a well put together movie, but once you pull apart any one thread of the movie, it starts to just fall apart. I mean, before the movie came out, I was going to make a video comparing Joker to the King of Comedy, but I just didn't feel the Joker stood enough on its own to consider the two equals. But if I have one criticism of Joker, the one reason why I think this movie really failed for me was that it wasn't trying to be a comic book movie or a drama or a comedy or a tragedy. Joker is trying to be a good movie. Director Todd Philips mentioned in an interview that he wanted to make a good movie, but that making that movie wouldn't really give him a large enough audience. So he wanted to sneak a thinking man's movie into the traditional comic book audience. And right out of the gate, I think that is totally the wrong way to go about making a movie. Joker fails at being almost anything because it has no intention of being anything other than one of the greatest films of all time. It's this approach that makes the movie feel unfocused. I mean, you see that in the plot. You could replace every character's name with someone else in this movie, and you would have no idea it was a Joker film. But Todd Phillips definitely succeeded in his goal. Fans are in love with this movie. But when you really take a look at Joker, it's easy to see how unfocused everything is. Like, the movie brings up topics such as mental illness because it knows this is a serious issue that will gain a lot of attention. But the movie makes absolutely no comment on mental illness in one way or another. Or if it does make a point, it contradicts itself like 100 times over. You could say that the city abandoning Arthur in the movie is a statement showing that we need to help those with mental health issues. But Arthur's transformation into Joker paints him in such a villainous light that it completely muddies whatever the film is trying to say. Same thing with talking about class struggle in the movie. It talks about class struggle, but it doesn't make any comment on it. At least not anything greater than, rich people bad. It's these pseudo-intellectual discussions that make Joker appear deep at first glance and appear poorly put together after every other viewing. But if there's one example of Joker's lack of focus that represents the rest of the movie's problems, it's that Joker isn't a comedy. But it's not a tragedy either. Okay, let me explain. About halfway through the film, Arthur mentions that he realizes his life isn't a tragedy anymore, it's a comedy. And while in a vacuum this line is incredibly cool and seems packed with meaning, nothing else in the film really backs it up at all. Because guess what? The Joker definitely is not a comedy. And when we talk about comedy and tragedy here, I want to move away from the conventional notions of funny versus sad. Sure, comedies are typically funny and tragedies are typically sad, but I would argue those aren't the defining characteristics of either genre. Like, besides the whole scene with the midget towards the middle of the movie, there really isn't anything funny about Joker. But that's not what restricts it from being a comedy. For example, one of the defining characteristics of comedy is that comedy focuses on ordinary people. The comedic hero is one that everyone can usually relate to. I don't think there's a better example of this than Superbad. The movie works so well because it talks about things that no other movies talk about. The main characters are high schoolers worried about getting laid and what they're going to do after high school. Everything about their situation is relatable. This is one of the greatest advantages of comedy. Dramas have to work to make you feel connected to the main characters. But in comedy, the world isn't ending or any of these over-the-top concepts. The conflict is usually just about relationships and stuff we understand. In fact, characters who are out of the ordinary in comedies are usually portrayed as ridiculous and absurd. Take Twelfth Night, which is my favorite Shakespeare play by the way, where the servant master Malvolio ends up as the villain because he's too uptight and cares too much about order. Or on the topic of classic comedies, The Importance of Being Earnest, where Lady Bracknell's Victorian-era ideals seem absurd when you give them any level of thought. Basically, relatable people are the heroes, and unrelatable people are portrayed as villains. But Arthur Fleck is the most unrelatable protagonist of all time. The movie sells it like he's this average guy going through average problems, but it's blown up to this caricature-like amount. The original point of Joker is that he's completely relatable. Let's look at Alan Moore's Killing Joke. In this story, the Joker started out as an average guy. Like Arthur, he's a failed comedian, but unlike Arthur, he turned to crime to support his family. And eventually Joker falls into a vat of chemicals and goes insane, you know the rest. The entire point of Joker is that he's an average guy who had one bad day, and later on he tries to drive Jim Gordon insane to show him every single human being is just one bad day away from being like him. But the Joker in this movie has every single handicap that puts him specifically on the path to becoming the Joker. It's like starting with all the stars in Mario Party. Of course he's going to become the Joker. First off, Joker has like basically every mental illness ever. Now don't get me wrong, mental illness is certainly something that people can relate to, and if it was the only defining characteristic of Arthur Fleck, then it would be fine. But not only does Arthur struggle with hallucinations and a whole bunch of other symptoms, which again, on their own are relatable, but every single person he meets is just an asshole. Like he holds this clown job in Gotham, which, two things about that. First of all, there's nothing relatable about dressing up as a clown and doing gigs. And second, this can't actually be how clown agencies work in real life. You're telling me they all meet up in this police precinct like locker room where they shoot the shit before going off to be clowns? I feel like this just can't be how it works. But anyway, not a single person is nice to Arthur, and for like no reason. The movie starts with a group of punk kids beating him up and taking his sign. Why do these kids want his sign? What the actual fuck are they gonna do with his sign? Even the movie has no idea why they take his sign. Later on in the movie, Arthur tries explaining to his boss that these kids stole a sign, and he's like, "Arthur, why would a group of kids steal your sign?" But it's not just the kid. The lady on the bus, his therapist, Thomas Wayne, the busboys, who are not only mean, but have an impressive knowledge of musicals, by the way. Every single person in this universe is an asshole. So not only is Joker incredibly mentally unstable, everyone in Gotham is just incredibly mean to him. The one person who does love him turns out to be lying to him his entire life. Also, he was abused as a child. Also, the government stops giving him support for his meds. Also, the city is full of violent crime and riots. In an attempt to make Joker down to earth and relatable by giving him struggles, the film makes him incredibly unrelatable because no one has that many struggles. There isn't that comedic focus on the everyman. In fact, Joker more closely relates to a traditional tragic hero. The tragic hero is someone who is an outcast from society. Because of their different and usually more enlightened view of the world, they're ostracized from the rest of society. I mean, that fits Joker to a T. And he has the classic tragic trait of hubris. Flex overconfidence during his violent episodes leads to his eventual rise as the Joker. The movie even fills the role of a revenge tragedy, one of the most popular types of tragedy out there. In these stories, the main hero has been wronged in some way and has to battle against societal forces to get revenge. Agamemnon and Hamlet are classic examples of revenge tragedies. And Joker isn't that far off. He has to enact revenge on Thomas Wayne and the elite for forgetting about the members of the lower class like himself. Okay, so that makes Joker a tragedy, right? Well, not really. You see, the Joker isn't a tragedy either. Original tragedies were usually about members of high society. Hamlet was a prince, Macbeth, Lear, and Richard III were all kings. These characters were often of high status because that was how they could show that they were different from the rest of society. And because they had so much power and wealth, you could easily see their downfall coming. For a contemporary example, look at House of Cards, where Frank Underwood's a powerful politician who ends up becoming the president. But Joker is certainly not a man of high status. In fact, he actively fights against those with high status. But Arthur not being of high status doesn't exclude Joker from being a tragedy. In fact, famous playwright Arthur Miller made it his work to make tragedy about characters who served as a universal everyman. This is the inspiration for his play Death of a Salesman, where the main character isn't some powerful king or prince, he's just your average American businessman. But as I already stated, Arthur Fleck is not a relatable character. He has a ridiculous amount of problems going on in his life. And at no point in the movie did I find myself relating to Joker. I found myself feeling sorry for him at points, but I could never once put myself in the Joker's shoes. The movie doesn't even give Arthur a tragic flaw. In every good tragedy, the hero is a largely good person except for one flaw which leads to their downfall. Hamlet's flaws is indecision, Macbeth and Frank Underwood's flaws are their ambition, But what the heck is Joker's flaw? If anything, Arthur's flaw is that he has a mental illness, because his illness is the only self-perpetuated thing in the movie that forces Arthur to commit decisions that lead to his downfall. Which, if true, would be grossly off-putting. But it's not true because Todd Philips didn't think twice about what Joker's flaw is. He isn't a good character outside of his one flaw. I mean, he's a homicidal maniac. He murders those kids in cold blood and then goes and dances for no discernible reason. He's put in this unrealistic city full of absurd violence and crime. And the ending doesn't help the movie at all. A lot of what I've been talking about when it comes to comedy and tragedy was largely popularized by Aristotle. But let's take a look at how Shakespeare defined comedy and tragedy. Basically, for Shakespeare, it was all about the ending. His comedies usually ended in a marriage of some kind, but usually just like an actual marriage. And his tragedies always ended in the death of his tragic hero. Now with the ending to Joker, it could really go either way. And that's because the movie has like 5 different endings and it just decides to show you all of them. The whole Joker rising among the crowd of his followers, that's a classic comedic ending. No, seriously. It's the marriage of the Joker and the Batman. Joker's violence has resulted in the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, leading to him becoming the Batman. The movie reinforces this idea that Joker and Batman will be locked into this eternal conflict. But then we cut to him in an insane asylum, wondering if this whole film even happened. This downfall is a classic tragedy ending. Yeah, I really don't. The movie doesn't commit to either ending, which just muddies up its meaning. And you could argue that Joker is trying to do something new by merging comedy and tragedy, but I think that's really just giving the film too much credit. It's not intentionally trying to do anything, it just doesn't know the basics of these genres to add to their discussion at all. In fact, the movie relies heavily on the fact that you haven't seen the things that have come before it. The movie's basically a copy and paste of Taxi Driver with a sprinkle of King of Comedy. And while it's completely okay for a movie to take inspiration from a past film, Joker offers nothing new to the conversation. If you've seen Taxi Driver, there's honestly nothing new or exciting here to make you ever want to see Joker. Besides Joaquin Phoenix's outstanding performance, he really is phenomenal in this movie. Like, this movie tries so hard to be intellectual, but it just doesn't know what it's talking about. When you're alluding to something in a movie, you should know the original meaning of the piece, and then how it relates back to your piece. Take the whole Send in the Clowns thing. The song is originally from Stephen Sondheim's A Little Night Music, where the song is used to convey the ridiculousness of the singer's current relationship status. It doesn't at all ask to send in the clowns because the clowns are already there. But does Joker mention this at all? No. They use the song because it sounds kinda deep. It's a song about clowns in a movie with the clown as the main character. Cool. It uses songs like Frank Sinatra's That's Life because Sinatra is a renowned and phenomenal musician. It doesn't care about the original context of these things, it only cares about the most surface level stuff. And just as when you're alluding to something in a movie, you should know the original meaning of the piece, if you're making a comedy or a tragedy, you should know the histories of these genres. Not because you need to do exactly what they do, but because having this history in mind will make for a better movie. It allows you to carve out your own unique take in this massive genre. And you should especially know what you're talking about when you have a line in your movie that comments on whether or not the main character's life is a comedy or a tragedy. But ultimately, Joker has no knowledge of what it's saying. It says things because they either sound cool or deep. So the Joker isn't a comedy or a tragedy. It's just a movie trying desperately to be good. Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at InfinityIncom1. And I know this is going to be a contentious one, so please put your comments down below and let's have a discussion about it. I'll see you guys next time.